Hello,
I
welcome
like those.
to our Thursday night program here as we continue to talk about the book of Revelation. We're so glad that you have decided to join us on this Thursday night. Dustin, good evening, brother.
What's up, man?
Glad,
How are
glad
you?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing okay. Can't complain. Can't complain. Glad that you could join us tonight as we'll talk about chapters 12, 13, and 14. We were just talking about a few minutes before we got this going here. Those are crazy chapters, and we'll see
They are.
just
Yes,
a minute that
very.
indeed they're kind of interesting. We'll talk about dragons with seven heads and
Hmm.
women with a lot of interesting stuff going on this evening. So, for those of you joining this evening, we welcome you to this program, Combine After of the Williamson Church of Christ in Augusta Road. We kindly ask you at this time to go ahead and grab your Bible as we'll be looking at the scriptures, not only in the book of Revelation, but also doing some cross references with other parts of the Bible as well. So we highly encourage you, go ahead and grab your Bible. Tonight, I'll be reading out of the New King James Version as we will continue our study here. So, Dustin, let me go ahead and read chapter 13 this
Well,
evening. 12. Yeah, let me go ahead and read chapter 12. That's right. And let's see here what the scripture says. So, Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. Well,
yes,
let's
sir.
go ahead and read the whole entire chapter, and then we'll dive into understanding what's going on here. So, the title is The Woman, the Child, and the Dragon. Now, verse 1. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail threw a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth and to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Verse 6, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, let's continue to read. And the title for the next verses is Satan Thrown Out of Heaven. And war, verse 7, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Let me just go ahead and make an interesting point here, Dustin, because
Mm,
we see very clearly here, it's talking about Satan, right? So we see here that Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. So I see Satan, I see dragon.
uh,
Very clearly, if I read verse 9, the Bible says, so the great dragon, which is Satan, was cast out, that serpent of old. So I see here, interesting, I see Satan, I see dragon, I see serpent, I see
right.
devil, and then it circles back to Satan. Dustin, to me that's very obvious. Is this serpent and the dragon very clearly here talking about the devil?
Yeah, no. I think you're right. That is a pretty obvious correlation that the scripture's making, and I think the way we're breaking it down is the right way and the wise way. We're not overly analyzing the situation. This is something we've been a warning not to do ever since the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of our study. We have a dragon here pictured in very flamboyant fashion. This is a dragon with many heads, many horns, so on and so forth. You know by now, those watching, that our approach to the book of Revelation is not to make too much out of this. Um, we have an obvious correlation here between this dragon and the devil that's good enough for us, trying to figure out if this can even be figured out.
Mm-hmm.
What are these heads? What are these horns? What? That's, that's something that will not help this study of the book of Revelation. We pretty obviously here have the dragon, the devil, as our bad guy figure in the chapter. And I think that piece of the equation, if we try to solve for the other variables, Matt, then
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then we've got a woman with child. Uh, I don't know about in your translation, but in mine, the C of that word child is capitalized.
Yes,
Is
mine
that
as well.
true
New
of
King
yours
James
too?
Version
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Now, everyone should know this is a interpretation of writing of the Greek letters. Every word was capitalized. Um, so this is not something that we get directly from God. This capital C, um,
Mm-hmm.
but it does give us information about what the translators thought, and the translators thought this child was Christ.
Right.
Which,
Sure.
if you just kind of step back and stay in this area of what we've got going on here, we have the devil. We've got the devil wanting to devour a child. This is all pointing in one pretty clear direction. We've
Yeah.
got the devil. We've got Jesus, and the woman would most likely in this case then be Mary. The church is also described as a lady,
Yeah.
but it was Mary specifically who gave birth to Jesus, who brought us the church. So the church did not give birth to Jesus. So we're dealing probably here with those main players. The devil, I know that's originally what you asked about, but moving on from there, we kind of fill in the other question marks, and we've got Jesus, and we've got this woman here pictured.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the
Interesting. Very
the uh,
interesting.
the sense of the chapter is a very ominous one, where we've got the devil wanting to defeat Christ,
Mm-hmm.
which is really the battle that has been as old as time. Back in Genesis chapter 3, this was
Absolutely.
foretold in a prophecy that this tension would always be there. So I we've got a lot of over the top language, that's for sure. But as far as the setup, what we have here is a very basic story.
Yeah. And it's interesting for those of you watching from home. I think Dustin, that I know the chapters we're studying tonight. They're quite interesting to study. To me, they're one of the
Yes.
favorites in the Bible because it helps you to tie all the knowledge that you have from the scriptures all together in this package, and very very soon we will understand the power of the beast and who gave the beast the power. We'll cross that reference with the book of Daniel chapter 7, but it makes clear, Dustin, when I read Revelation chapter 12 as we're reading tonight, it very much helps me to understand the beginning of the book of Matthew, where persecution arose when Herod tried to persecute Mary to kill Jesus. And very clearly here we see that before even Jesus was gone, the devil wanted to get rid of Jesus for obvious reasons. And it's interesting, this war that takes place in heaven.
Yes.
And one of these days when we get to heaven, I wonder if we'll be able to talk to God about this and kind of fill us more in the details of
Mm,
Revelation 12 here, what really happened. But we get a clue here what happened before the foundation. It's quite interesting stuff here, Dustin.
yes.
We don't get a lot of answers of what happened, with
Yeah.
Satan and how that battle started. But we do have a glance to that struggle, and we see that here. And to me, that's quite fascinating. It is quite fascinating.
Yeah. No, no, agreed, agreed. Th- this is the kind of language here that allows people's minds to wander,
Yeah.
and we focus on some pretty interesting topics, with clearly symbolic detail. So, uh,
Yeah.
if you study it well, if you study it appropriately, it can be a fascinating and fun study.
Sure.
But a lot of people really, a lot of people really miss miss their chances to learn more by the way they study here, and
Hmm.
it's too bad. Um, we've got a classic story being told, and we just have to accept the presentation of it, and not try to get too much in the weeds, if you
Yeah.
understand that expression, Matt.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not try to get too much in the details of the story. I know that's a strange thing to say about the Bible, but we're only saying it about language where that's the way to study it.
Yeah.
This apocalyptic language, this very symbolic and figurative language, is exactly the kind where you're not supposed to stop and ask, "What are the 10 horns?" We've got 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 died. Like, let's go back and make all of that mean something. This is not the way to study. Um,
But honestly, it doesn't matter, because the
that's exactly right.
essence of the story, it's
That's
what
exactly
matters the most. And the essence is Jesus. At the end of the day, he's victorious, and
right.
that's what the church wanted to hear, because they were being persecuted,
Yeah,
right?
that's precisely the way to look at this, right? I mean, we've been saying all along that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. In other words, what are you learning about Christ from every portion of this book? When
Hmm.
we said at the beginning, when we get a little inflated in our symbolism and our figurative speech, we're going to stop, and we're going to say, okay, what are we learning about Jesus? Well, right here, we're learning that Jesus is victorious. Here,
Yeah.
you've got a monster versus a baby, and the baby is winning. And this is something that the Christians needed to hear, because they are following that Jesus, who is the victor here in chapter 12. I, I like the way you present it. Yes, sir. Great job. Thank you.
Dustin, it was a while ago, maybe a couple of years ago. I was pondering on this idea of salvation, and the idea of
Mm,
Jesus coming, and everything that Jesus had to go through. And of course, we are now talking about everything that happened prior to Jesus being born, right?
yeah.
And it amazes me, Dustin, that at the end of the day, all of this spiritual battle, and happening between good and evil, and of course God and Satan, at the end of the day, God, yes, indeed, Jesus was victorious over death and over sin. But all of the pain, all of the suffering, everything that Jesus had to go through, when I think about this, when I read this, it was because of you and me.
Mm,
It was because of us. And perhaps you're watching this from your home, or you're driving, whatever you're doing at this time. And I don't know what you're going through in your life, but I have a major life lesson for you this evening as we read the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter, is that no matter where you are and what stage you are in your life, no matter what you have done, no matter the mistakes that you have done, of course, the consequences of those, they're still going to linger. There's nothing we can do about it. But let me tell you something. It doesn't care how the world sees you and treats you, but
right.
here's the message that we have for you this evening, is that in God's eyes, you are very special.
True.
And Jesus went through everything that he did, and all of these things are happening. It was because of you, because because God wanted to make sure that we would have the opportunity, if we choose to do so,
Yeah.
to reestablish our relationship with him. And there Jesus comes in the book of John, John saying that he is the way, the truth, and the life. So I hope that makes you feel very, very, very special tonight, because in God's eyes you are very much indeed.
Because these Christians who were living the struggle, they had to feel helpless. I mean, they had to feel like they had to feel like the little baby fighting against the dragon, because the Roman Empire was massive, and the Roman Empire had the power to kill any, could not possibly see a victory against the Roman Empire. So
Mm-hmm.
it would be helpful for them to understand they are aligned with God and with the victor ultimately in this situation. Great point.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's just finish reading here
Yes,
this
sure,
chapter
sure.
so we can dive into chapter 15. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accusers of our brethren who accuse them before our God day and night has been cast down. If you want to follow with me now, I'll read verse 11. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and to the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. I love that, Dustin. The devil knows that he has a short time. And of course, that time, it didn't matter if it was short or long, he failed big time. Big time.
Right.
Verse 13. Now, when the dragon, of course, we know the dragon here is the serpent that we read in Genesis chapter 3.
Yes.
The devil, Satan, saw that he had been cast to the earth. He persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, that he might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Verse 15. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like the flood after the woman, but that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and she opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had expelled out of his mouth. And the dragon, verse 17, and the dragon was angered with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So, of course, it's interesting, Dustin, because that language of the one here very much seems to be talking about the church as well. Suffering persecution. Talk to us a little bit about this so we can conclude chapter 12.
No, correct. I mean, this is something that I'm teaching a series on parables at the moment, and one of the things that I'm saying in that series is get the main idea, and do not try to analyze and interpret every single facet of parable. I think this is a mistake in Bible study to overanalyze. And here, you're right, Matt. I mean, just a simple reading of it says, okay, well, on the one hand, it sounds like this woman is the mother, quote unquote, mother of Jesus. On the other hand, it sounds like this is the church. Mm-hmm. I would say leave it at that, and don't try to just appreciate the symbolism that's being presented without having to precisely define what it is, where, and when. Chapter 12 of Revelation is a beautiful story of hope and protection from God will, so to speak, to Psalm 23. You remember where David is saying that the Lord provides for him. Here we've got this horrific monster being symbolically described in a lot of might and a lot of aggression, and he's coming after a woman, he's coming after a baby. Clearly the monster is going to be able to win, right? Wrong, because it's not the woman versus the dragon, it's not the baby versus the dragon, it's God versus the dragon, and God is able to more than conquer this. And this is what would have been so helpful to the Christians, because they feel this helplessness. They feel like they're fighting against a monster, and they were the Roman Empire. But ultimately, if they stick with God, He's going to provide them the means of escape. He's going to protect them, and if they do die, as many of them did, well, they're going to gain the ultimate victory.
Absolutely.
So why would you be anything other than a Christian? That's the message of Revelation chapter 12. Why be anything other than a Christian?
Yeah.
And the details are presented there to bolster that claim, to reinforce it, but not for us to get caught up in overly, and certainly not for us to get lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Love how you put it, Dustin. Simply do. All right, let's dive into chapter 13, Revelation chapter 13. We thank you so much for joining us this evening here as we do this very special series. We remind you that all of this material is available to you on the Williamson Church of Christ Facebook, as well as on YouTube. Feel free to share this material with as many people as you would like. So Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and his authority. So I would like for those of you watching now, if you have your Bible open with you, go ahead and underline verse 2. If you understand the verse 2, you very, very, very much understand the message that we are studying here this evening. All these, the beast and the dragon, if you can understand what the beast is in verse 2, and the dragon, which you already know, we saw that in chapter 13, is Satan. If you understand verse 2, things will be a whole lot easier as we continue to do our study this evening. And I'll circle back on verse 2 here in just a second. Verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wounded was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So it's interesting. Not too long ago, Dustin, I taught a series on Sunday mornings on the book of Daniel.
Right.
And it is quite amazing. For those of you watching from home, if you'd like to have a homework, I have a wonderful homework for you. Go ahead and read the book of Daniel chapter 7. And one thing that I guarantee you that you will see in Daniel chapter 7, especially on the first 25 verses of that, you will see a tremendous similarity to the language that we see in the beginning of Revelation chapter 13. We'll see here that the beast, which is, we know here the beast represented a king or a kingdom in the book of Daniel. That fourth beast, which of course we know here was the Roman Empire, because we see in Daniel chapter 2, verse 37-28, the first beast was Babylon. We see in the book of Daniel chapter 8, verse 20, the second beast was the Medo-Persian Empire.
Yeah.
Thirdly, in Daniel chapter 8, verse 21, we see that third king or kingdom, which was Greece. And last but not least, we know for sure that the fourth beast that Daniel prophesied in the book of Daniel, of course he prophesied in other chapters as well, we see that image recurring. We know for sure that that was the beast of representing the Roman Empire. And we see in the book of Daniel chapter 7, the same language, the same image described: a leopard, a bear, a lion. And we see that here as a cross reference. And it makes total sense, Dustin, because one thing I know for sure is that while Jesus was alive, he was living under Roman authority.
Indeed.
That is
Yes.
for sure. That is that's the simplest thing we can understand here from
Sure,
our
sure.
study this evening.
And these monsters, these animals that you're describing, are real animals, unlike the dragon in chapter 12,
Yeah,
a mythical animal. But
yeah,
these are animals that are very powerful.
yeah.
And if we are to understand correctly kind of the role of the Roman Colosseum, then many of these animals from around the world would have been brought in and shown to Roman citizens, and they would be fought by the gladiators. Some of these animals would be used to eat up the Christians as punishment for their Christianity. So these are ferocious beasts that seem like, there's the key, seem like they have all power, but they do
Mhm.
not. And so the Lord is able to save his people even from, scary beasts like this.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and I love that illustration. So now that we wrap our minds and understand, and of course we've
Mhm.
been talking about the Roman Empire from chapter 1. This is
Of
very
course.
obvious, but that idea is certainly assured here in chapter 13. And we see the point that it makes total sense to me. Does it? The Bible specifically says in verse 2. Bible specifically says that the dragon, which we just saw in chapter 13, is Satan, the devil, the
Yes,
serpent.
yes, yes.
Look at that. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Now, Dustin, it's obvious that the Roman Empire was an out. It was, I mean, it was in that time and age. It was the empire
It
that,
was.
that
Yes.
ruled over the world, and
Yes.
indeed, it was extremely powerful. And Dustin, it's amazing. I'm right here in England right now, and
Mm,
I have seen various places. Actually, I went to Bath last week, and I saw the Roman baths in that town.
mm.
We see how that kingdom went from
Spread the whole world.
Italy.
Yes.
It spread all over.
Mhm,
Thus, and indeed, all that power and glory it was given by Satan.
mhm,
And it's interesting, thus, and we see all those emperors claiming themselves to be God by the
mhm.
senators would declare them to be God, and people would have to bow down and worship. Now, thus, if we make a cross reference, isn't that the reason why Paul, during his second missionary trip, got beaten many times, many places in the book of Acts, because he would not bow down to those
Yeah.
images, and of course you had the Jews also making a big old mess around.
Yes, of course. Of
It
course.
doesn't all that power, all that glory, unfortunately used to bad stuff,
Sure.
unfortunately used to many emperors persecuting the church
And,
and killing Christians.
that's such a, as sad as all of that is, Matt. That's such a common story in history. You can understand why people would look at Revelation chapter 13 and try to read about today's world in it, because there is such a power struggle going on between good and evil, really of all times. And as common of a thread as that is throughout history, it's not the thing to do to look at Revelation chapter 13 and try to read in
Hmm.
any modern day leaders, any
Hmm.
modern day empires or nations. This was a specific message to these specific people.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a message that has replayed itself throughout history, but no, this is not any sort of roadmap to history or history's leaders or empires. That's not what we have going on here. These Christians felt helpless, plain and simple. These Christians felt like they would be eaten up by the Roman Empire. And we see uh, time after time the Lord is telling his people, I'm going to take care of you. That's the message of Revelation chapter 12, chapter 13. That's the message we're getting from the Lord here.
Absolutely, Dustin. Love the way you put that out. So if we continue to read that, I think there's two more points. This I want to talk about the second beast, and then I want to talk about, of course, when people talk about the book of Revelation, they talk about that number, the
Yes, for
666,
sure.
and that is definitely here in chapter 13. And we'll cover that. I think that
Sure,
is
sure.
essential. So look in verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like the lamb, and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So it's interesting. We'll see here that the second beast comes up as a proxy, I would say a proxy of the first beast, in order to in order to enforce, pardon me, in order to enforce that people were bowing down and worshiping the beast, which of course was given power and authority by by Satan, by the
Yes,
dragon.
sir.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
the sound I have heard.
Good English
Oh, Dustin,
word
I
there,
lost you
Matt.
there.
Proxy. A good English word.
Go
What
back.
about now? Do you have me
Go
now?
back. Now I
Yeah.
can hear
What?
you. What did you say about
Okay.
proxy word?
Yeah. No, I was just saying that's a good English word, Matt. Good English word there. Yeah. The presentation chapter 13 is that this beast is never ending, right? This this beast has beasts to enforce its will, and so it looks seemingly unstoppable. Seemingly is the word, right? It looks like it cannot stop, but that's going to make the victory that God wins over it even sweeter, because the Lord is going to be able to beat this beast. We may not see it tonight, but the Lord is going to beat this beast, and the Lord is going to save people from this beast. The painting in Revelation chapters 12 and 13, if we were watching this as a movie, this is the first half of the movie when the bad guy is doing all of the stuff, and it looks like he's going to win. Have you ever watched these superhero movies,
Yeah.
Matt, where the bad guy's doing everything and we're really focused on his evil plan and it looks like he's going to win? Well, the good guys haven't shown up yet. We've got a fight to fight, and we'll get to that fight, but the Lord is going to win. And this was the message that needed to be sent to these Christians who were hiding for their lives, afraid that they would be discovered by the Roman Empire,
Hmm.
dragged out of their homes, away from their families, and gobbled up, devoured by this empire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the way you put it. So last but not least, I think this is wonderful. We already too much here between dragons and a dragon and beasts and woman and a lot of stuff
Yeah.
here going on this evening. But before we end our study here this evening, it's crucial for us to do a analysis here on verse 18
Yes.
of Revelation 13, because it says, here's the wisdom. Let
Mhm.
him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, Dustin, interesting. I was doing
Very
some
famous
study
part of
on that.
Revelation here.
What is that?
Very famous part of the book of
Oh,
Revelation.
extremely famous. I think
Mhm.
people, they may not know a whole lot about. They don't know who wrote the book of Revelation, where it was written, but they certainly do know the number 666. So, Dustin,
And
7 is the number
and here, yes, and
of
here
divine.
we are in a section where we're talking about beasts and dragons and everything, which is not literal, by the way.
Yeah.
We have a woman that's given wings of an eagle that can fly away, a dragon that's trying to spit water out of its mouth to drown the woman, and earth is coming and soaking up this water. Clearly, nothing about this is literal. So why, I would ask people watching, why when we get to this number 666, why would we suddenly say, okay, this is a real number that is literal? That seems silly to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, Dustin. Absolutely.
This is not a literal mark that is going to be put on anyone's forehead or hands. We've already seen that imagery before about being marked by God. This is not a literal thing at all. This is a symbolic thing. Now, the number has symbolism attached to it, and that's what you were about to get into. The number 7
Mhm.
is already in the book of Revelation, associated with deity, with God. We have 7 seals in that book. Remember, that's where we actually left off last week. The 7th seal being open, and then we have the 7 trumpets. So on God's side of things, we see the number 7 presented a lot in the book of Revelation. 7 churches are spoken to in chapters 2 and 3.
Mhm.
Well, the number 6 would stand in obvious to that. It was less than God, or as it's called here in chapter 13, verse 18, the number of a man.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, Dustin. I like that explanation. So I think there are two, for those of you watching from home, you may be like, okay, go ahead and tell us, what is the understanding of that? So, Dustin, number one, 7 divine, it's perfect.
Yep,
6 could
yep.
be, the be representing imperfection, human imperfection.
Sure,
So
sure,
if you
that
have six
works.
six six six, it's just emphasizing the imperfection,
Yeah.
in the unrighteousness of humanity. Now, I do understand. So perhaps some of you are watching this even. You say, "Well, yeah, but go ahead and talk about that study, gematria." Is that how you pronounce, Dustin? That talks about numbers representing a letter and vice versa. Now, indeed, there are studies out there. Um, People say that Nero, Caesar, who was the Roman between 54 and 68,
Mhm.
he was known, to have this um, set of numbers representing him, the 666. And there are various studies you can look into that, gematria. I don't depends how you pronounce,
Yeah.
and it has a lot of meaning. Um, so that's
At
another way
one
to look
at
at it.
one time or another, 666 has been applied to just about everyone, right? I mean, some people see this as the Pope. Some people see this as Henry Kissinger. Some people
Yeah.
see this as you name it, right? So as we've been studying the Book of Revelation, we're in tonight's study, for example, we're talking about a dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and diadems and everything you can imagine. And we never peeled back all of that. Let's figure out what all of this means. We're not about to start trying that when we come to the number 666. The
Exactly.
presentation of it is simple. It is the number of a man. That's what the Bible gives us that information. His
Mhm.
number is 666. The obvious first take is that, okay, this is not God. So we know that much, and that that is the message to the Christians, that
Mhm.
if you follow after this man or this group of men, then you're choosing them over God, and they can't do for you what God can. That's a simple message at its base.
Yeah.
We have been saying a few times along the way that the book of Revelation is simple if we allow it to be, right? If
Mhm.
we kind of step out of our own way and just read the story of the book of Revelation
Mhm.
as a story that would be told to struggling Christians, then its message is really clear. The Lord is going to grant them this victory. They feel helpless. They feel outmatched by the Roman Empire. They are indeed outmatched by the Roman Empire, but the Lord is on their side, and He will take care of
Absolutely.
everything.
Absolutely.
That's the book. Right? That's the message.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dustin. Man, I think that's a wonderful point for us to stop here this evening.
Great.
I certainly look forward to seeing you next week
Yeah,
at
man. Thank you.
7 o'clock as we get here together to continue our study on the book of Revelation. Dustin, I hope you have a wonderful night. We thank you so much for
Thanks,
tuning
man.
in. For those of you watching this evening, we thank you so much for tuning in, and may God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we are very excited and look forward. Thank you very much.